I overheard my wife mock my size at girls' night, and I quietly rebuilt my body, career, and standards, then confronted her and rewrote our marriage. Her monthly girls' night was held at our house. I was supposed to be working late, but a canceled meeting brought me home earlier than expected. As I quietly entered through the garage door, planning to slip upstairs unnoticed, their voices carried from the living room, loud, uninhibited by alcohol and the assumption of privacy. Size does matter, though, my wife's voice, slightly slurred but unmistakable, declared. I mean, I love him and everything, but honestly. The eruption of laughter that followed felt like daggers. I froze in the hallway, becoming an unwilling eavesdropper to my own humiliation. So, what do? Just fake it? One of her friends asked between giggles. Sometimes, my wife replied. Other times, I just think about that guy from accounting at her office. Remember the one I showed you on Instagram? More laughter and the clinking of glasses twisted my stomach into knots as I stood there, invisible, reduced to a punchline. I could have stormed in, demanded an explanation, and created a scene. Instead, something inside me went cold and calculating. I silently retreated to the garage, started my car, and drove around aimlessly for 2 hours until I received her text asking when I'd be home. When I finally returned, her friends were gone. She greeted me with a kiss that felt like betrayal, asking about my day with the same mouth that had mocked what she apparently considered my inadequacy. I answered with practiced normalcy, watching her through new eyes, searching for signs of the contempt I'd heard in her voice that night, lying beside her in bed. I stared at the ceiling, replaying those words. It wasn't just about physical dimensions, it was about worth, about respect, about whether the woman who had vowed to love me actually valued me as a man. Sleep evaded me as questions multiplied. How long had she felt this way? Who else knew? Was our entire relationship built on a foundation of secret disappointment? Morning came after hours of silent deliberation. I watched her sleeping face, peaceful and unaware of the storm she'd created. In those quiet moments, something shifted inside me. The initial hurt crystallized into determination. If she measured a man's worth by such shallow standards, I would show her what truly mattered. I slipped out of bed without waking her and stood before the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. The man looking back at me wasn't defined by any single attribute, not by the numbers in our bank account, not by inches or centimeters, not by anything so easily measured and mocked. The path forward became suddenly, startlingly clear. This humiliation would become transformation, not to win her approval, I realized with a jolt, but to reclaim my own sense of value, to rebuild myself not according to her metrics, but by standards that actually mattered. I splashed cold water on my face, a symbolic gesture washing away the old perspective. When she woke later, I'd be the same attentive husband she expected. She wouldn't know that I'd hurt her, wouldn't see the calculations running behind my smiles. The wheels were already turning as I formulated a plan, not for revenge, but for something more profound, a redefinition of worth that would ultimately reveal exactly who we both were. The weekend passed in a strange performance of normalcy. I smiled at the right moments, laughed at her jokes, and maintained the rhythm of our marriage while a new awareness colored every interaction. With each passing hour, I began noticing things I'd previously overlooked. Subtle barbs disguised as playful teasing, the slight eye roll when I spoke at dinner with friends, how she'd interrupt me mid-sentence as if my thoughts weren't worth completing. Had these microaggressions always been there, or was I now hypersensitive, searching for evidence to support what I'd overheard? Either way, the relationship I thought we had was unraveling, thread by thread. By Monday morning, the initial shock had transformed into something colder and more focused. As I watched her prepare for work, applying makeup with practiced precision and selecting her outfit with careful consideration, I wondered how much of our life together had been equally calculated. Had she settled for me while secretly harboring disappointment? The thought both wounded and angered me. "What are you staring at?" she asked, catching my gaze in the mirror. "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just appreciating the view." She seemed pleased by this, offering a familiar flirtatious smile that now felt hollow. I kissed her goodbye and headed to my job at the engineering firm, where I'd worked comfortably, if not passionately, for the past 6 years. Sitting at my desk that morning, I found myself unable to focus on the project specifications before me. Instead, I opened a blank document and began typing, not in anger but with methodical purpose. What defined success in a man's life? What constituted true worth, if not the physical attributes my wife found lacking? Professional achievement, financial security, respect among peers, physical fitness, mental sharpness, emotional intelligence. The list grew as I typed, becoming not just a reaction to her mockery, but a blueprint for transformation. I'd become comfortable in our marriage, perhaps complacent. When had I last pushed myself toward greater achievement? When had I last truly challenged my own limitations? That evening, instead of heading home, I drove to the local university, where I'd once considered pursuing an advanced degree before settling into married life. The campus hummed with energy as students moved between evening classes. In the administration building, I collected information about their executive MBA program. Competitive, demanding, but designed for working professionals. On my drive home, I stopped at a gym I'd passed hundreds of times without entering. Inside, I spoke with a trainer about membership options and fitness assessments. The conversation left me simultaneously intimidated and invigorated. When I finally arrived home, she was already there, irritated by my lateness and the cold dinner she'd prepared. "Where were you?" "I texted twice," she said, the edge in her voice familiar but newly significant. "Sorry, got caught up with something after work," I replied, not yet ready to share my emerging plans. She studied my face for a moment, perhaps sensing something different in my demeanor. "Everything okay? You've been quiet since the weekend." For a fleeting second, I considered confronting her then, laying bare what I'd heard and how it had affected me. But the moment passed. This wasn't about forcing an apology or explanation. This was about a fundamental reevaluation of myself and our marriage. "Everything's fine," I assured her, the lie coming easily. "Just thinking about making some changes." "What kind of changes?" she asked, wariness creeping into her expression. I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "Nothing dramatic. Just feeling like I've been in a bit of a rut lately." She seemed to relax at this, offering suggestions about haircuts and perhaps a shopping trip for new clothes, surface-level changes that missed the depth of what I was contemplating. I nodded along, already mentally calculating the hours in my week that could be reallocated, the resources that could be redirected, the energy that could be repurposed. That night, as she slept beside me, I finalized my plan. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight, nor would it be dramatic enough to raise suspicions, but day by day, week by week, I would rebuild myself according to measures that actually mattered, not for her approval, though her reaction would certainly be informative, but for my own sense of worth. The man she had mocked would soon cease to exist, replaced by someone stronger in every meaningful way. In that process of becoming, I would discover whether our marriage deserved to survive. 3 weeks into my transformation, the changes remained subtle but significant. My application to the executive MBA program had been submitted, accompanied by a passionate statement of purpose that surprised even me with its clarity. The program director had called for a preliminary interview, impressed by my professional background and apparent drive. At the gym, mornings began at 5:30 a.m., well before my wife's alarm. The trainer had developed a progressive routine that left me exhausted but increasingly energized. Muscles I'd forgotten I possessed ached with newfound purpose. My diet had shifted from convenient to intentional, though I presented these changes to my wife as simple health concerns rather than part of a larger plan. "You're losing weight," she remarked one evening, her tone suggesting both approval and puzzlement. "Just trying to take better care of myself," I replied, not mentioning the spreadsheet tracking my progress or the goals I'd set for 6 months ahead. At work, I'd volunteered for a challenging project other engineers had avoided, the redesign of a failing municipal infrastructure system. The hours were longer, the pressure greater, but my focus had sharpened remarkably since the night I'd overheard her words. Each calculation, each designed solution, felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my professional confidence. I'd also begun quietly researching our financial situation. Years of comfortable complacency had left our savings mediocre, our investments minimal. Without announcing my intentions, I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor who outlined strategies for aggressive but responsible growth. The next day, I opened separate investment accounts, allocating funds from my personal savings toward higher yield opportunities. My wife noticed my increased absences, the early mornings, the late evenings, but seemed to accept my explanations of work demands and health commitments. Sometimes, I caught her watching me with curious eyes, perhaps sensing the currents of change beneath the surface of our routine, but she didn't press beyond superficial questions. What surprised me most was how little I missed our previous patterns, the evenings of mindless television, the weekends of social obligations that left me drained rather than fulfilled, the conversations that never ventured beyond gossip and complaints. All felt increasingly like artifacts of a lesser version of myself. 6 weeks in, the opportunity arose for a weekend leadership conference hosted by a prestigious consulting firm. Normally, I would have declined, preferring the comfort of our usual weekend routines. Instead, I registered immediately and informed my wife over dinner. "This weekend? But we have the neighborhood barbecue on Saturday," she protested. Fork paused midway to her mouth. "You should still go," I said calmly. "This conference could open important doors professionally. I can't pass it up." She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You've been different lately, more, I don't know, distant." It was the first direct acknowledgement of the shift between us. I considered my response carefully, not yet ready for full disclosure. "I've been focused," I corrected, "on improving myself, on building something better." "Better than what?" she asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Better than settling," I replied, simply holding her gaze. Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps or concern, but she quickly masked it with a shrug. "Whatever makes you happy, I guess. Just don't forget about us while you're improving yourself." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. Us. As if she hadn't reduced me to a punchline for her friend's entertainment. As if she hadn't measured my worth by the most reductive standards possible and found me wanting. At the conference that weekend, I found myself surrounded by ambitious professionals with clear visions of their futures. During a networking session, I struck up a conversation with the CEO of a mid-sized engineering firm specializing in sustainable infrastructure, precisely the field where my current project was breaking new ground. "Your approach to the Westside Renewal Project is fascinating," he commented after I'd explained my work. "We've been looking for someone with exactly that perspective." By Sunday evening, I had his business card and an invitation to discuss potential opportunities at his rapidly expanding company. The salary range he casually mentioned was nearly double my current compensation. Driving home, I felt a strange sense of calm purpose. 2 months ago, I would have dismissed such an opportunity as too risky, too demanding, too far outside my comfort zone. Now it felt like simply the next logical step in a journey that had begun with humiliation, but was increasingly defined by self-discovery. My wife was watching television when I arrived home, her feet tucked beneath her on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. She asked perfunctory questions about the conference, barely listening to my deliberately vague answers. "You missed a great barbecue," she said, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Everyone was asking about you." I nodded, unpacking my bag while considering how different our priorities had become, or perhaps always had been. The realization should have saddened me, but instead it brought clarity. The distance growing between us wasn't just my creation, it was the natural result of seeing our relationship without illusion. "I'm going to shower," I told her, already mentally preparing for the week ahead. The MBA program admissions decision would arrive soon. The municipal project was entering its critical phase. The discussion with the CEO was scheduled for Wednesday. Later that night, as she slept beside me, I updated my progress document. Physical transformation ongoing, professional advancement accelerating, financial independence in process, self-respect growing daily. The man she had mocked was disappearing, replaced by someone who measured his worth by achievements rather than opinions. Someone who recognized that true size was determined by impact, by courage, by the willingness to reach beyond comfortable mediocrity. The question remaining was whether she would recognize this transformation before it carried me beyond her reach. 3 months into my transformation, the changes were becoming impossible to ignore. My acceptance into the executive MBA program had arrived, along with a partial merit scholarship that validated my application. 20 pounds of fat had melted away, replaced by lean muscle that changed not just how I looked, but how I moved through the world, with purpose, with confidence. The municipal infrastructure project had been completed ahead of schedule, earning recognition from city officials and industry peers. Most significantly, I had accepted the position with the sustainable engineering firm. The negotiations had been surprisingly smooth. my newfound confidence allowing me to advocate for compensation that reflected my true value. I would start in 4 weeks, after completing my obligations to my current employer. These developments forced a conversation I'd been strategically delaying. On a Friday evening, I waited until dinner was finished before sharing my news. "I've accepted a new position," I said, watching her expression shift from distraction to sharp focus. "What? Where? When did you even interview?" The questions tumbled out as she set down her wine glass. "It's been in process for a while," I replied calmly. "The company specializes in sustainable infrastructure design. The role offers significantly more responsibility and compensation." She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "And you didn't think to discuss this with me before deciding? What about my job, my friends, our life here?" The self-centered nature of her concerns wasn't lost on me, not, "Is this what you want?" or "What makes this opportunity right for you?" but immediately how it impacted her comfort, her social connections. "The office is only 40 minutes from here," I explained. "No relocation necessary. As for discussing it beforehand, I needed to be certain it was the right move before bringing it to you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "There's more you're not telling me. All these changes, the gym, the diet, now this job, what's really going on?" Abruptly, the moment stretched between us, taut with possibility. I could have revealed everything then, the overheard conversation, the humiliation, the subsequent re-evaluation of our relationship. Instead, I chose a partial truth. I realized I've been settling for less than I'm capable of. In my career, my health, my ambitions. I decided to change that. "And what about us?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Have you been settling there too?" The question hung in the air, dangerously close to territories we'd both been avoiding. I met her gaze steadily. "I think we both have things to consider about what we want from this marriage," I said finally. She flinched, as if I'd raised a hand to her. "Are you saying you want to leave me after all these years? You get a new job and suddenly I'm not good enough?" The irony was so acute I almost laughed. Instead, I maintained my composure. "I'm saying we've grown comfortable with patterns that might not serve either of us. I'm making changes in my life. That naturally affects our relationship, so what am I supposed to do while you're off becoming this new, improved version of yourself? Just wait around and hope I still fit into your plans?" Anger edged her words now, but beneath it I detected something else. Fear. "You could consider what you truly want," I suggested, "beyond the surface, beyond the comfortable routines. What brings you genuine fulfillment? What kind of relationship would challenge you to grow rather than just exist?" She stared at me, confusion evident. These weren't questions we'd asked each other in years, if ever. Our marriage had settled into comfortable patterns of mutual compromise and unspoken resentments, her apparent disappointment in my inadequacies, my willingness to accept her subtle disrespect. "I need some air," she said abruptly, pushing back from the table. She grabbed her keys and phone, disappearing through the front door without another word. I didn't follow her. Instead, I cleared the dinner dishes, responding to a few emails about my upcoming transition. When my phone chimed with a text notification, I expected it would be her, but instead found a message from the MBA program director about orientation materials. Hours passed. Near midnight, I heard her key in the lock. She'd been crying, her eyes were puffy, her makeup smudged. She'd clearly gone to a friend's house, probably to discuss my sudden transformation and unreasonable behavior. I wondered if it was one of the same friends who had laughed at her mockery months ago. "I don't want to lose you," she said without preamble, standing in the doorway of our bedroom where I sat reading. "But I don't understand what's happening. I set my book aside. What don't you understand? Why now? Why all at once? For years you were content with your job, with our routines. You never mentioned feeling unfulfilled or wanting more. Then suddenly you're working out, applying to MBA programs, taking new jobs. It's like you had some kind of midlife crisis overnight." The word crisis rang false. This wasn't a crisis but an awakening, not a breakdown but a recalibration. Still, I recognized the genuine confusion beneath her defensiveness. "Sometimes clarity comes all at once," I said carefully. I realized I'd been measuring my worth by limiting standards. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might hear the echo of her own words in mine. I decided to change how I defined success. She moved into the room then, sitting on the edge of the bed. And where do I fit in this new definition? The question was genuine, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. I considered my answer carefully, knowing it would shape whatever came next between us. That depends, I said finally, on whether you're interested in knowing the man I'm becoming or if you preferred the version you could easily dismiss. She flinched slightly, but didn't look away. Something passed between us, a moment of recognition perhaps, or the first tremor of a foundation beginning to shift. I want to understand, she said quietly. Help me understand what changed. And so, we talked late into the night, not about what I'd overheard, that revelation would come later when necessary, but about ambitions long deferred, respect too readily sacrificed, patterns of interaction that diminished rather than elevated, about the difference between comfortable complacency and genuine fulfillment. By morning, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. She looked at me differently, with a mixture of weariness and newfound interest, as if truly seeing me for the first time in years. Whether that new vision included a future together remained to be seen. What mattered was that I now stood before her not as the punchline to a cruel joke, but as a man defining his worth on his own terms, terms that couldn't be mocked or dismissed with a casual, drunken comment to friends who didn't matter. The following weeks unfolded in a strange dance of distance and discovery. My wife observed my transformation with growing curiosity, occasionally attempting to participate, joining me for a morning run, asking questions about my MBA coursework. Her efforts seemed genuine, if tentative, like someone reaching across a widening gulf, unsure if their arm was long enough to bridge the gap. I welcomed these attempts without depending on them, maintaining my focus on the path I'd chosen. My last day at the old firm arrived, marked by surprising warmth from colleagues who'd noticed my evolution. My department head pulled me aside during the farewell gathering. "Whatever lit a fire under you these past months, I'm almost sorry to see you go now," he said, clapping my shoulder. "You've been doing the best work of your career." "I needed to remember what I'm capable of," I replied simply. His eyes, shrewd after decades in the industry, studied me. "Looks like you figured it out." My first week at the new firm validated every instinct that had led me there. The challenges were substantial, the expectations high, but I found myself rising to meet them with an energy I'd forgotten I possessed. My team responded to my leadership style with enthusiasm, and the CEO who had recruited me made a point of highlighting my contributions during the weekly executive meeting. When I returned home late Friday after that first successful week, I found my wife waiting with an unexpected dinner setup. Candles, wine, and my favorite meal, carefully prepared. "I thought we should celebrate your new position," she said, an uncertain smile playing at her lips. I thanked her and we ate, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in months. She asked intelligent questions about my work, seeming genuinely interested in the technical challenges and innovative approaches. When she reached for my hand across the table, the gesture felt both familiar and strange. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began after we'd moved to the living room with our wine glasses, "about how we've both been settling, about measuring success by the wrong standards." I nodded, waiting. "I've always defined myself through other people's eyes," she continued. "My parents, my friends, even you. I've been so focused on maintaining appearances that I never stopped to consider what I actually want." This vulnerability was new, or perhaps it had always been there, buried beneath the carefully maintained facade of our marriage. "What do you want?" I asked, genuinely curious. She shook her head slightly. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I want to be more than just someone's wife, someone's colleague, someone's friend. I want to matter for reasons I choose." The parallels to my own journey weren't lost on me. For a moment, I glimpsed the possibility of transformation for us both, parallel paths that might eventually reconverge with greater strength. Then she shifted closer on the couch, her hand sliding along my thigh in a familiar prelude. "I've missed you," she murmured, her intention clear. "We've barely touched in months." I caught her hand gently, holding it still. "Before this goes further, there's something we need to address." She pulled back slightly, wariness returning to her expression. "What is it?" The moment had arrived, the confrontation I'd been strategically delaying until I stood on solid ground of my own making. I took a careful breath. "3 months ago, I came home early from work while you were hosting your girls' night." Her expression froze, a flash of realization widening her eyes before she controlled it. "Oh, I overheard your conversation, I continued, about how size matters, about how you sometimes fake it, about the guy from accounting you apparently fantasize about. Color drained from her face, followed immediately by a deep flush. I was drinking. It was just stupid girl talk. You know how it gets with everyone trying to one-up each other with outrageous stories. So, you made me the punchline of an outrageous story to impress your friends? My voice remained calm, controlled. You mocked the most intimate aspect of our relationship for their entertainment. She flinched. That's not fair. It wasn't about you. Not really. Just what? I pressed when she faltered. Just me being insecure and stupid, she finished, eyes dropping to her hands. Saying what I thought would get laughs and approval. I didn't mean it. Ibrishi, whether you meant it isn't the point, I said. The point is that you were willing to demean me, to literally minimize my worth, for a moment of social currency with people whose opinions shouldn't matter more than our relationship. Tears formed in her eyes. Is that why all this happened? The working out, the new job, the MBA program? To prove something because of one thoughtless comment? Not to prove something I corrected, to remember something I'd forgotten, that my value isn't determined by your assessment or anyone else's, that I'm capable of more than I'd settled for. Your comment wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. So, everything between us since then has been what, revenge? A long-term plan to make me regret that night? No, I said firmly. It's been about reclaiming myself, about remembering that a relationship should elevate both people, not diminish either one. And has our relationship been diminishing you? She asked, her voice small. Brookie. I considered the question carefully. We fell into patterns that allowed both of us to be less than we could be. I accepted subtle disrespect because confrontation seemed harder than compromise. You sought validation outside rather than demanding more from yourself and from us. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. Can we fix this? Can we start over somehow? The question hung between us, weighted with years of shared history and newfound understanding. I studied her face. The genuine remorse, the fear of loss, but also something new. Respect. Not the careful deference of our previous dynamic, but a recognition of equal strength. I don't think we can start over, I said finally. Too much has changed, but we might be able to start something new, something built on genuine recognition of each other's value. I do value you, she said quickly. I always have, even when I was too self-absorbed to show it properly. Prove it, I challenged gently. Not with words or gestures designed to smooth things over. Prove it by becoming someone who wouldn't find that kind of mockery amusing, even among friends. Prove it by defining your own worth through more meaningful measures than social approval. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The realization that what I was offering wasn't simple forgiveness, but the opportunity for parallel transformation. Not a return to our previous dynamic, but the possibility of something stronger, more authentic. I want that chance, she said with quiet determination, for myself and for us. I nodded, neither promising nor refusing, simply acknowledging her choice. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in months, the possibility existed that it might be one we could walk together, not as the people we had been, but as the people we were becoming. 6 months after that pivotal conversation, our lives had transformed in ways neither of us could have predicted. The revelation about what I'd overheard became not an ending, but a painful, necessary reset that forced us both to confront the hollow core of what our marriage had become. My professional trajectory continued its upward climb. The MBA program challenged me intellectually while opening doors I hadn't known existed. My role at the sustainable engineering firm expanded as I brought in 2 major clients who appreciated our innovative approach to urban renewal. The financial benefits followed naturally. My salary had nearly doubled, and strategic investments were building a security we'd never prioritized before. More significantly, my wife embarked on her own journey of transformation. After weeks of soul-searching, she enrolled in a counseling psychology program, pursuing an interest in human behavior she'd abandoned years ago for a more practical corporate career. She reduced her hours at work to accommodate her studies, reprioritizing long-deferred ambitions over immediate financial comfort. I've spent so many years caring about how things look rather than how they feel, she explained one evening as we sat reviewing her course materials. I want to understand why I've been so driven by external validation and maybe, eventually, help others who struggle with the same issues. The honesty in her self-assessment impressed me more than any apology could have. She was confronting not just the hurtful comment I'd overheard, but the insecurities and values that had made such a comment possible in the first place. Abra. Our relationship evolved through careful, deliberate effort. Weekly conversations became opportunities for authentic connection rather than routine exchanges of schedules and complaints. Physical intimacy, when it eventually resumed, carried new meaning. Genuine desire rather than obligation. Mutual vulnerability rather than performance. On the anniversary of the night that had catalyzed everything, we decided to have dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. The evening carried symbolic weight for both of us, though neither had explicitly acknowledged it. As we waited for dessert, she reached across the table for my hand. "I've been thinking about worth lately. What determines it? How we measure it," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "My professor asked us to examine our core values as part of an assignment. It made me realize how superficial my metrics have been." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. A year ago, I would have defined success through such limited terms: appearance, status, material comfort. I judged others by those same shallow standards. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Including you, in ways I'm still ashamed to remember." "Bersh. We all evolve," I offered. "The important thing is recognizing when our values need reassessment." "That night with my friends," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, "I betrayed something essential between us, not just by what I said, but by caring more about their approval than your dignity, by reducing you to a physical attribute instead of seeing the entirety of who you are." The memory of that overheard conversation had lost its sting, replaced by appreciation for the growth it had ultimately sparked. "Abrahi, and now?" A smile touched her lips. "Now, I understand that a person's worth isn't measured in inches or dollars or status symbols. It's measured in integrity, in courage, in the willingness to become more than comfort allows." She reached into her purse and placed a small, wrapped package on the table. "This is for you. Not as an apology, we've moved beyond that, but as recognition." Inside, I found a vintage compass, beautifully crafted and fully functional. A simple engraving on the back read, "True direction comes from within." "It reminded me of you," she explained, "of how you found your path when it would have been easier to remain lost, of how you measured yourself by internal standards when external ones had failed you." The gift held meaning beyond its obvious symbolism. It acknowledged not just what I had accomplished, but how I had done it, through principle rather than resentment, through growth rather than revenge. "Thank you," I said simply, the words encompassing more than gratitude for the object itself. Later that night, in the quiet of our home, she asked the question that had lingered unspoken between us. "Are we going to make it? Truly make it, not just coexist?" I considered her, the woman who had mocked me and the woman who now sought understanding with equal determination. The journey between those two versions contained both pain and possibility. "I think we have a chance," I said honestly, not because of who we were, but because of who we're becoming, not because our hurt has disappeared, but because we've used it to build something stronger. She nodded, accepting the qualified hope as more valuable than easy reassurance. "The woman I was a year ago wouldn't deserve this second chance," she said. She was too concerned with appearances, too willing to diminish others to elevate herself. "And the man I was a year ago wouldn't have had the courage to demand better," I acknowledged. He accepted subtle disrespect because confrontation seemed more difficult than compromise. We sat with this shared understanding, the recognition that our growth had evolved on parallel but separate paths. Whether those paths would ultimately converge permanently remained an open question, one that couldn't be answered through promises alone but would reveal itself through continued choices and actions. What remained certain was that the mockery I'd overheard had lost its power to define me. The transformation it had catalyzed had become something self-sustaining, driven not by wounded pride but by authentic ambition. The achievements that followed, professional, financial, personal, weren't reactions to her words, but expressions of potential I had always possessed but never fully claimed. True size, I had discovered, wasn't measured by physical dimensions or others' assessments. It was measured by the courage to define yourself when others would reduce you, by the strength to use pain as a catalyst rather than an excuse, by the wisdom to recognize that genuine worth comes not from what others see in you, but from what you demand of yourself. That realization, more than any external success, was the true measure of how far I had come. And regardless of what our future held as a couple, it was a standard of measurement I would never relinquish again.